Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through time and space. Tonight, we'll explore the complete timeline of one of the ocean's most mysterious worlds, planet 46b. So settle in, close your eyes, and let the gentle waves of this story wash over you as we dive deep into the history of Subnautica. Part 1. The Ancient Architects. Long, long ago, before humanity ever dreamed of reaching the stars, an ancient and highly advanced civilization roamed the galaxies. They called themselves the Architects, though others would come to know them as the Precursors. These beings were remarkably different from us. Tall, with 4 powerful limbs, 4 eyes that saw the universe in ways we can barely imagine, and a culture built on logic, efficiency, and the pursuit of a single, desperate goal. You see, the Architects were dying, not as individuals at first, but as a species. They had long ago conquered death through technology, transferring their consciousness from one body to another, living for thousands upon thousands of years. But something was wrong. Their ability to reproduce had failed them. No new architects were being born, and slowly, inevitably, their numbers dwindled. Each loss was permanent, irreplaceable, and the weight of extinction pressed down upon their entire civilization. In their desperation, the architects became seekers. They traveled from world to world, star system to star system, searching for a solution. They sought a species that could act as a genetic template, something that could help them understand what they had lost, perhaps even restore their ability to bring new life into existence. They built research facilities on countless planets, studying life in all its forms, hoping that somewhere in the vast diversity of the universe they would find the answer to their survival. And so it was that approximately 1,000 years before our story truly begins, the Architects arrived at a small, ocean-covered planet orbiting an unnamed star. This world, which they designated as simply another research site, would later be catalogued by humans as 46b. It was a planet of extraordinary beauty. Vast oceans of crystal-clear water, coral reefs of impossible colors, and marine life that had evolved in ways both familiar and wonderfully alien. The Architects established a presence here, as they had on so many worlds before. They built their installations with the characteristic efficiency of their people. Massive structures that blended biological and technological elements, powered by ion crystals and designed to last for millennia. These weren't just research stations, they were monuments to hope, each one representing another chance to save their species from the long, slow slide into oblivion. On 42b, they discovered something remarkable. In the deep volcanic regions of the planet's ocean, there existed a creature unlike anything they had encountered before. Massive, ancient, and highly intelligent, these beings would come to be known as sea emperors. They were gentle giants, possessing what the Architects recognized as a rare form of telepathic communication. More importantly, these creatures carried an enzyme in their bodies, a substance that the Architects identified as a potential key to their research. The Sea Emperor enzyme was extraordinary. It had remarkable life-extending properties, the ability to heal damage at a cellular level, and, most intriguingly, it seemed to enhance the very mechanisms that the Architects had lost. In the genetic makeup of these creatures, the Architects saw possibility. They saw hope. But there was a problem, one that would ultimately prove catastrophic. The Sea Emperors were rare, incredibly rare, and they were not easy to study in their natural habitat. The architects, despite their advanced technology, could not simply synthesize the enzyme. They needed specimens. They needed test subjects. And in their desperation, they began to make choices that would haunt this planet for the next 1,000 years. Part 2. The Kharaa Bacterium. As the architects established their primary research facility, they built in a location that seemed ideal, the crater of an ancient, extinct volcano. They called this facility the Primary Containment Facility, and it was a marvel of their engineering. Deep beneath the ocean's surface, protected by the caldera walls, the architects created a massive enclosed environment. Here, they could study the sea emperors in controlled conditions, or so they believed. They captured a juvenile sea emperor, bringing her into the facility. In her natural habitat, she would have grown to an enormous size, but in captivity, even in an enclosure as large as the architects could create, her growth was stunted. She was still massive by most standards, but not what she should have been. The architects began their research, extracting enzyme samples, studying her biology, trying desperately to unlock the secrets that might save their species. But the architects had been to many worlds, and, like any travelers, they carried things with them, things they didn't intend to bring. Among their equipment, in their vessels, perhaps even in their own bodies, lurked something terrible, a bacterium, a disease, a plague that would come to be known simply as Kharaa. No one knows exactly when the Kharaa first appeared on 46b. The architect's own records suggest it may have been brought from another world, a stowaway in their biological samples or equipment. What is certain is that it found in the warm waters of this ocean planet an ideal environment for propagation. Kharaa was insidious. It infected organisms at the cellular level, altering their genetic structure, causing massive physical changes. Infected creatures developed distinctive greenish pustules and cysts on their bodies. They became aggressive, territorial, and, as the infection progressed, they would die, releasing billions of bacteria cells back into the water to seek new hosts. The bacterium spread through the water itself, requiring no direct contact, moving with the currents and tides. The architects watched in horror as the ecosystem they had been studying began to collapse. Species after species became infected. The beautiful reefs began to sicken. Creatures that had been peaceful became dangerous. And, worst of all, the bacterium proved effective against the architects themselves. Despite their advanced technology, despite their long mastery over their own biology, the architects found themselves vulnerable to this microscopic enemy. Members of their research team began to fall ill. Their medical technology, so effective at treating the ailments they had encountered before, proved useless against Kharaa. The bacterium was too adaptive, too aggressive, too perfectly designed for survival. The architects realized they had made a catastrophic error. In bringing the bacterium to this world, they had potentially doomed not only their research but the entire planet's biosphere. And so they made a decision. They would quarantine the planet. They activated a massive weapon system, a structure they called the Quarantine Enforcement Platform. Built into the mountainside on the edge of the crater, this device was capable of detecting and destroying any vessel attempting to enter or leave the planet's atmosphere without authorization. The message was clear and would remain so for the next 1,000 years. Planet 4546b was under quarantine. No one could leave until the bacterium was contained. No one could arrive without risking infection and death. The architects had effectively imprisoned themselves on this world, along with every living thing on it. But the architects did not give up. They threw everything they had into finding a cure. They studied the bacterium endlessly, mapping its genetic structure, trying to understand how it spread, how it replicated, how it might be stopped, and they kept returning to their original research subject, the sea emperor and her miraculous enzyme. Part 3. The Architect's Last Hope. As the Kharaa continued to spread across planet 4546b, the architects intensified their research efforts. They had discovered something remarkable. The sea emperor enzyme was naturally resistant to the bacterium. The emperor herself, confined in the primary containment facility, showed no signs of infection despite being surrounded by Kharaa-contaminated water. Her eggs, precious few that she produced in captivity, also carried this resistance. The architects theorized that if they could synthesize or replicate this enzyme in sufficient quantities, they might create a cure that could be distributed across the entire planet. They could cleanse the oceans, save the remaining uninfected creatures, and perhaps finally allow themselves to leave this world and continue their mission elsewhere. But there was a critical problem. The enzyme produced by the captive emperor was not potent enough. Something about her confinement, her stress, her inability to live naturally, had weakened the enzyme's properties. The architects tried everything they could think of. They adjusted the environment in her enclosure. They attempted to synthesize the enzyme artificially. They studied the enzyme's molecular structure in exhaustive detail. Nothing worked. The enzyme they could produce was simply not strong enough to serve as a cure. Through their telepathic connection with the Emperor, the architects learned something that filled them with both hope and despair. The Emperor communicated to them that her eggs would produce a much more potent form of the enzyme when they hatched, but only if they hatched naturally, in the right environment, with the right conditions. She needed to be free. She needed to be in the open ocean. She needed to be able to care for her young as nature intended. But the architects could not release her. Their protocols, their logic, their desperate need for control in the face of extinction, all of it prevented them from taking that risk. What if she swam away? What if they lost access to her? What if her eggs were destroyed by predators or scattered by currents? They had waited so long, worked so hard, and they could not bear the thought of losing their only hope. So they made a choice that would prove to be their final mistake. They kept her confined. They tried to force the eggs to hatch in captivity, using every technology at their disposal. And one by one, every egg failed. The embryos would develop, but they would die before hatching, or shortly after, their enzyme glands underdeveloped, their systems too weak to survive. The Emperor mourned each loss. Through their telepathic link, the architects felt her grief, her anger, her desperation for her children. But still they persisted, believing that with enough time, enough experimentation, they could find a way to make it work without releasing her. As years turned to decades and decades turned to centuries, the architects on planet 4546b began to die out. The bacterium claimed some. Others succumbed to accidents, the harsh environment, or simply the weight of their failing mission. They could not transfer their consciousness to new bodies. There were no new bodies to transfer to, not here on this quarantined world. They could not call for help. The quarantine prevented any ships from approaching, and besides, the architect's civilization was spread thin across the galaxy. Each group focused on their own desperate research. One by one, the facilities fell silent. The Disease Research Facility, built in the Lost River biome to study infected creatures safely isolated from the main ecosystem. The Alien Thermal Plant, providing power to the Quarantine Enforcement Platform. The smaller research caches scattered across the planet. The architects manning them died, and their installations, built to last forever, continued their automated functions without their creators. The last of the architects on planet 4546b recorded their final messages. They documented their failure, their regret, and their hope that someday someone might come who could succeed where they had failed. The last living architect, whose name is lost to time, made one final entry in their data logs. They expressed their sorrow for what they had done to this planet, for the lives lost, for the Emperor trapped in eternal imprisonment. And then they too fell silent. The Sea Emperor remained alone in her tank, surrounded by the bones of the unhatched children, waiting. The Quarantine Enforcement Platform continued its vigilant watch over the planet's airspace, its power cores still active, its targeting systems still online. The bacterium continued to spread through the oceans, though eventually reaching a kind of equilibrium as the ecosystem adapted in small ways. And for approximately 200 years, nothing changed. The planet waited, quarantined and silent, while human civilization far across the galaxy slowly developed the technology to reach the stars. Part 4. The Mongolians and Early Human Expansion. While planet 4546b lay isolated and infected, humanity was beginning its grand adventure into space. The early 22nd century saw the formation of the Transgov, an overarching governmental body designed to coordinate humanity's expansion beyond Earth. Alongside this came the Altera Corporation, a megacorporation that would grow to become one of the most powerful entities in known space. Altera specialized in everything: construction, mining, research, technology, even governance in some regions. As humanity spread across the stars, Altera was there, building colonies, establishing trade routes, and acquiring territory and rights to exploit new worlds. They were ruthless in their pursuit of profit, but they were also efficient, and in the competitive environment of space colonization, efficiency often mattered more than ethics. Among the ships traveling through this region of space was the Mongolians, a vessel built by Altera for long-range exploration and resource assessment. The ship had a crew that included families. This was before the more stringent regulations of later years, and among those families were the Dega clan. Paul Degasi, the patriarch, was a wealthy businessman who had invested heavily in the expedition. His son, Bart Degasi, worked as a crew member, and there was Marguerite Maida, a former soldier with the Transgov military who had taken on mercenary work for Altera. The Mongolians was on a standard survey route, cataloging systems, checking for valuable resources, looking for potential colony sites. They had no idea that they were about to encounter a quarantine zone established by an alien civilization. They had no idea they were being watched. As the Mongolians approached planet 4546b's system, the crew detected something unusual. Organized radio signals coming from what appeared to be an ocean planet with a single massive crater formation. This was extraordinary. Radio signals meant technology. Technology meant either an active civilization or valuable ruins. Either way, it was worth investigating. The captain ordered a closer approach. They would do a standard scan, maybe send down a probe, and report back to Altera. If there was something valuable down there, the company would want to know about it. They never got the chance. As the Mongolians entered high orbit, the quarantine enforcement platform detected the vessel. Its ancient sensors, still functioning perfectly after 1,000 years, identified the ship as an unauthorized craft attempting to enter a quarantined zone. The platform's massive ion cannon charged, calculated its trajectory with perfect precision, and fired. The beam struck the Mongolians amidships. The crew had perhaps a moment to realize what was happening before their ship began to explode around them. Hull plating vaporized. Systems failed catastrophically. The ship began to break apart, pieces of it burning up as they fell toward the planet below. But not everyone died in the initial strike. As the Mongolians disintegrated, escape pods launched automatically. Most of them were destroyed in the secondary explosions or burned up on entry. But one pod, carrying 3 people, made it through the inferno. Paul Degasi, his son Bart, and Marguerite Maida strapped themselves in as their pod plummeted toward the ocean below, the only survivors of a crew that had numbered dozens. The pod crashed into the ocean's surface with tremendous force. Water flooded in through cracks in the hull. The 3 survivors barely managed to extract emergency supplies before the pod sank into the depths. They found themselves treading water in an alien ocean, with no ship, no way to call for help, and no idea where they were or what had just attacked them. Part 5. The Degasi Survivors. Paul, Bart, and Marguerite managed to swim to a nearby island, one of the few pieces of land above water on this ocean planet. The floating island, as they would come to call it, was a strange place. Rock formations that seemed to float above the water, suspended by some kind of ancient technology they didn't understand. But it was dry land, it had fresh water, and it had edible plants. For people who had just watched their ship explode, it was paradise enough. They established a base camp, using supplies salvaged from their escape pod and resources gathered from the island. Paul, ever the businessman, immediately began to think about survival in terms of profit and efficiency. Marguerite, the soldier, thought about defense and food. Bart, caught between his father's practical ambitions and Marguerite's survival instincts, tried to keep the peace and make sense of their situation. Days turned to weeks. They explored the waters around the island cautiously, discovering a rich and diverse ecosystem. The fish were edible, though some were dangerous. The plant life was strange but could be cultivated. They built a more permanent base, using their fabricator technology to create tools and shelter from the raw materials they gathered. But Paul was not content to simply survive. He began to dream of rescue, yes, but also of opportunity. If Altera found out about this planet's resources, there would be money to be made. He started documenting everything they found, every new fish species, every mineral deposit, every useful plant. He recorded voice logs, talking about the planet's value, about how they would need to establish salvage rights when rescue came. Marguerite, meanwhile, grew increasingly suspicious of the planet itself. She had been a soldier, and soldiers learned to recognize when something was wrong. The way some of the fish behaved, the strange ruins they glimpsed in deeper waters, and, most troubling of all, the occasional creature that seemed diseased, covered in greenish pustules and far more aggressive than it should be. She didn't know what it meant, but her instincts told her this planet was dangerous in ways they didn't yet understand. Bart found himself caught between his father's optimism and Marguerite's paranoia. He did the work that needed doing, maintaining their base, catching fish, repairing equipment. But he also began to wonder if rescue was really coming. They had seen their ship destroyed by some kind of orbital weapon. Whatever had shot them down might shoot down any rescue mission too. Months passed. Their floating island base became increasingly sophisticated. They had grow beds producing food, water filtration systems, even some creature comforts. But they all knew they couldn't stay there forever. The island's resources were limited, and some of the things they needed, deeper minerals, certain types of fish, required diving to depths that were dangerous without proper equipment. It was Marguerite who proposed they build a base underwater. She had been exploring the waters around a massive cave system she'd discovered, one that seemed to lead down into the planet's interior. There were resources there, she insisted, things they needed. More importantly, there were answers. She had seen structures down there, ruins clearly built by something intelligent. If they wanted to understand what had shot down their ship and whether rescue was even possible, they needed to investigate. Paul was reluctant, but he also recognized the logic. They needed more resources, and the underwater caverns Marguerite had found, what they came to call the jelly shroom caves, seemed relatively safe and rich in materials. With Bart's help, they constructed a new base deep in the caves, using the bioluminescent jelly shroom mushrooms for navigation and establishing a more permanent operation. The cave base was more austere than their island home, but it was functional. From here, they could access deeper minerals and study the strange ecosystem of the caves. Marguerite spent her days hunting the more dangerous predators that lived in the caves, bringing back food and materials. Paul continued his documentation, his logs growing increasingly detailed and valuable from a commercial perspective. Bart maintained their equipment and tried to keep some sense of normalcy in their increasingly strange existence. But the deeper they went, the more evidence they found of something wrong with this planet. They encountered more infected creatures. They found pieces of technology that were clearly not human. Strange devices built into the rock, apparently ancient but still functioning. And they began to experience symptoms themselves. Nothing major at first. A persistent cough, a strange rash, moments of dizziness. They attributed it to the alien environment, to stress, to any number of normal causes. They had no idea they had been infected with Kharaa almost from the moment they arrived on this world. Part 6. The Degasi's Final Days. As the infection progressed slowly through their bodies, the Degasi survivors made a fateful decision. They would build one more base, even deeper than before. Marguerite had discovered an entrance to what she called the Grand Reef, a massive underwater biome filled with strange membranous plants and an abundance of resources. More importantly, she had found something else. An entrance to what appeared to be a massive underground river system, and structures that were definitely artificial. Paul saw opportunity. If they could salvage alien technology, the value would be immense. Bart saw answers. Maybe these ruins would explain what had destroyed their ship. Margaret saw a challenge, something to fight, a puzzle to solve. Despite their deteriorating health and increasingly strained relationships, they agreed to build one final base in the deep reef. The Deep Grand Reef Base was their most ambitious project. Built at a depth that required significant decompression when returning to the surface, it gave them access to the Lost River, a massive underground biome filled with ancient fossils, strange blue brine, and more of the alien structures. From this base, they explored deeper than they had ever gone before. They discovered things that filled them with wonder and terror. The skeleton of a creature so massive it defied comprehension. Its bones spread across kilometers of the Lost River floor. Ancient tunnels, clearly artificial, leading even deeper into the planet. And everywhere, the green pustules of infection on the local wildlife, growing more prevalent the deeper they went. Paul's logs from this period show a man increasingly obsessed with the commercial value of what they were finding, but also increasingly ill. He talked about symptoms he couldn't explain, about Bart becoming difficult to work with, about tensions with Margaret. Bart's own observations, recorded in his PDA, showed a young man growing frightened of what they were discovering and increasingly aware that something was very wrong with all of them. Marguerite, characteristically, refused to acknowledge any weakness. She continued to explore, to hunt, to push deeper into the dangerous waters. She was the one who first encountered the warpers, bizarre creatures that seemed part biological and part technological, and which showed an unusual interest in the Degasi survivors. When a warper phased near Bart one day, scanning him with what seemed like deliberate intent, Margaret knew something was terribly wrong. The final days of the Degasi survivors are pieced together from fragmented logs and evidence found in their abandoned bases. It's clear that tensions reached a breaking point. Paul wanted to focus on survival and maintaining their bases until rescue came. Bart had become increasingly convinced that no rescue was coming and that they needed to find another way off the planet. Margaret wanted to keep exploring, to find the source of the structures they had discovered, convinced that understanding the planet was key to their survival. The logs end abruptly. The Deep Grand Reef Base shows signs of a hasty abandonment. Some supplies are missing. Others are left behind in disarray. There are no bodies, no clear evidence of what happened in those final hours. What is known is this. Paul Degasi almost certainly died of the Kharaa infection, likely in the Deep Grand Reef Base or shortly after leaving it. His remains were never found, probably consumed by the planet's scavengers. Bart Degasi's fate is less certain. Some evidence suggests he may have tried to return to the surface, perhaps seeking medical treatment or trying to signal for rescue one final time. And Margaret Maida. Her fate would remain a mystery for many years, becoming something of a legend. The fearless mercenary who refused to die, who supposedly saw things in the deep waters that defied explanation, who fought off a Reaper Leviathan with nothing but a knife, or so the stories would later claim. Whether she survived those early days on planet 45486b, and if so, for how long, would not be known for a very long time. The Degasi had been on planet 45486b for approximately 2 to 3 years. They had explored its waters, built bases in 3 different locations, and documented much of what they found. but they had never understood the true nature of the planet they had crashed on. They never knew about the architects, the quarantine, or the bacterium slowly killing them. They never knew they were being watched by ancient automated systems, or that far below them, in a tank deep in the planet's crust, a lonely emperor still mourned her children. The floating island base fell into disrepair. The jelly shroom cave base flooded and was claimed by the cave's inhabitants. The deep Grand Reef base remained intact but empty, a memorial to 3 survivors who had tried and failed to escape their oceanic prison. And, far above, the quarantine enforcement platform continued its vigil, waiting for the next ship to approach. It would not have to wait much longer. Part 7. The Aurora Mission. 7 years after the Degasi disappeared, Altera Corporation noted the vessel's absence. This was not unusual. Ships were sometimes lost in the vast distances between stars. What was unusual was the location. The Mongolians had been surveying a region that Altera had plans for, and losing a ship there was inconvenient. But Altera was a practical corporation. Rather than send a dedicated rescue mission, they simply adjusted the flight plan of another ship that would be passing through the region. The Aurora, a massive capital-class vessel carrying equipment and personnel for the construction of a phase gate in a nearby system, was instructed to perform a scan of Planet 45-6b while passing through. If there were any survivors, the Aurora would pick them up. If not, at least they would know what had happened. The Aurora was an impressive ship, over 1 kilometer long, carrying thousands of tons of equipment, construction vehicles, and a crew of 157 people. Among those crew members were a few passengers, including a man named Riley Robinson, who was traveling in a non-essential role. The ship's manifest also included something that wasn't officially recorded, a secondary mission known only to the highest levels of Altera command. You see, Altera had become aware of strange signals detected in this region of space. Signals that suggested technology far beyond human capability. The corporation's leadership saw opportunity. If there was alien technology on Planet 4546b, technology that could shoot down a capital-class vessel from orbit, Altera wanted it. The Aurora's chief technical officer, Yu, had been secretly briefed to assess any alien technology they found and, if possible, secure it for Altera. As the Aurora approached Planet 4546b, the crew conducted their scans, detecting the same radio signals the Mongolians had picked up years before. They detected a breathable atmosphere, liquid water oceans, and what appeared to be ruins of some kind on the surface and underwater. The captain ordered a closer approach for more detailed scans, and once again, the quarantine enforcement platform awakened. Its targeting systems locked onto the massive vessel. Its power cores, maintained by architect technology that had functioned flawlessly for 1,000 years, charged the ion cannon to full capacity, and it fired. The difference this time was the size of the target. The Mongolians had been a relatively small exploration vessel. The Aurora was massive, heavily built for deep space travel, designed to carry enormous loads across vast distances. The quarantine enforcement platform's weapon struck the Aurora along its drive core section, a devastating hit that would have vaporized a smaller ship instantly. But the Aurora did not explode immediately. Instead, the drive containment began to fail. Power systems cascaded into emergency shutdown. The ship's reactor, damaged but still active, began an uncontrolled reaction. Alarms blared throughout every deck. The crew had minutes, perhaps, to react. Captain Hollister ordered an immediate evacuation. Life pods launched from every available bay, crew members scrambling to reach them as the ship shuddered and groaned around them. Some pods launched successfully. Others were damaged by secondary explosions or failed to launch at all. The Aurora, unable to maintain its orbit with its engines destroyed, began to fall toward the planet below. Riley Robinson, jolted awake by the alarm klaxons, ran through tilting corridors toward the nearest life pod bay. All around him, the ship was coming apart. Ceiling panels fell. Sparks shot from damaged conduits. Crew members he knew ran past him, eyes wide with terror. He made it to a life pod, strapped himself in, and hit the emergency launch button with seconds to spare. The pod ejected from the Aurora just as a massive explosion tore through the engineering section. Riley caught a glimpse of the ship through his pod's small viewport, the massive vessel breaking apart, fires spreading across its hull, pieces of it already burning up in the atmosphere. Then his pod hit the atmosphere, and everything became heat and vibration and the screaming of alarms. The Aurora struck the ocean's surface several kilometers from the crater's edge, its momentum carrying it into the shallower waters there. The impact was catastrophic. The ship broke into three main pieces, the bow section plowing into the underwater terrain, the midsection crumpling, and the stern, containing the damaged drive core, settling in deeper water, still intact but catastrophically damaged. And then there was silence, the kind of silence that comes after a disaster, when the noise stops and survivors are left to comprehend what has happened. Life pods were scattered across hundreds of square kilometers of ocean. Some had landed safely and deployed their flotation systems. Others had crashed, their occupants killed on impact. Still others had sunk, drowning their passengers before they could escape. Of the 157 crew members aboard the Aurora, only a handful had survived, and of those survivors, most would not last long. Because this wasn't just any ocean planet. This was Planet 4546b. This was a quarantine zone, and everyone who had survived the crash, everyone breathing the air and drinking the water and swimming in these seas, had just been exposed to Kharaa. Part 8. Riley Robinson Awakens. Riley Robinson woke to fire and pain and the smell of burning electronics. His life pod had crashed hard, and something inside it was sparking, threatening to ignite the whole pod. Training took over. He grabbed the fire extinguisher and suppressed the flames, then assessed his situation. The life pod's systems were badly damaged. Communications were offline. The fabricator worked, but many of the more advanced blueprints were corrupted. The medical station reported impact trauma, but nothing life-threatening. The pod's radio was receiving broadcasts from other life pods, automated distress calls, but whenever Riley tried to send a signal himself, nothing happened. He climbed the ladder to the pod's hatch and emerged into an alien ocean. The water was a beautiful turquoise, crystal clear in every direction. Strange, colorful fish swam past the pod. In the distance, he could see unusual plant life and rock formations. Above, a sky of unfamiliar stars and a sun setting on the horizon. It was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Riley had basic survival training, like all Altera crew members. He knew he needed three things: water, food, and shelter. The life pod could provide temporary shelter, but it wouldn't last forever. He needed to explore, to find resources, to try to contact any other survivors. He dove into the water for the first time, and Planet 4546b revealed itself to him. The shallows around his pod were teeming with life. Small, harmless fish that seemed almost curious about him. Larger predators that kept their distance but watched him carefully. Plants that ranged from the familiar, something like kelp, to the bizarre, acid mushrooms and brain corals and creep vines with glowing seed clusters. Riley fabricated a basic scanner from materials he gathered, then began the work of survival. He scanned everything he encountered, building up a database of life forms and resources. He learned which fish were edible, which plants provided materials, which rocks contained the minerals he needed. He fabricated a knife, then a flashlight, then a small air tank that let him dive deeper. The life pod's radio continued to broadcast automated messages, and Riley listened to them all. He heard Keen's voice from Life Pod 19, talking about finding cave systems and being attacked by something. The message cut off mid-sentence. He heard CTOU from Life Pod 2, mentioning something about his orders and looking for alien power sources. That message also ended abruptly. One by one, the other life pods fell silent. Riley tried not to think about what that meant. He focused on survival, on building, on exploring. He ventured further from his pod each day, discovering new biomes. The kelp forests were relatively safe if he avoided the stalkers that hunted there. The grassy plateaus were rich in resources but home to larger predators. And everywhere, scattered across the ocean floor, were fragments of wreckage from the Aurora and pieces of Altera equipment. At night, when he climbed back into his pod and tried to sleep, Riley would look out across the water toward the Aurora. The massive ship sat on the horizon like a dying giant, fires still burning in places, hull breached in countless places. He knew he should go there, should search for survivors, should try to access the ship's long-range communications. But he also knew what that ship represented: failure, death, and the wreckage of any quick escape from this planet. Days turned into a week. Riley established a routine: gather resources in the morning, explore new areas in the afternoon, fabricate new tools and equipment in the evening, check the radio for any new signals. Every day the same pattern. Every day, no rescue. And then, 8 days after the crash, Riley's PDA received a new signal. It wasn't from a life pod. It was from the Aurora itself. An automated broadcast warning that the ship's drive core was reaching critical status. If the containment failed completely, the resulting explosion would be devastating, potentially irradiating a large portion of the surrounding ocean. Riley realized he had a new imperative. If he wanted to survive on this planet long term, if he wanted the ocean to remain livable, he needed to repair the drive core. He needed to go into the Aurora. Part 9. Exploring the Shallows. Before Riley could attempt entering the Aurora, he needed better equipment. The radiation from the damaged drive core was already spreading, making the waters near the crash site dangerous. He would need a radiation suit, better tools, and probably a vehicle. His exploration of the safe shallows had yielded a wealth of resources, but also questions. He had found debris that clearly didn't come from the Aurora. Older wreckage, pieces of a ship that had been here for years based on the coral growth on it. He discovered PDAs scattered on the ocean floor, some from Aurora crew members who hadn't made it, but others older, telling fragments of a story about survivors named Degasi. Reading those old PDAs gave Riley a strange mix of hope and dread. Hope because someone had survived a crash here before. Dread because whatever happened to them, they had clearly not escaped. Their final logs spoke of disease, of disagreements, of diving deeper in search of answers. Riley also began to notice patterns in the environment. The fish behaved in predictable ways once you understood them. The predators had territories. The herbivores had migration patterns. It was an ecosystem that had developed over millions of years, and he was just a temporary visitor, trying not to disturb it too much while he survived. He built a small sea base in the shallows, just a simple tube and a hatch, powered by solar panels. It wasn't much, but it was his first real shelter beyond the life pod. Inside, he set up a fabricator, some storage, and a bed. Small comforts, but they made a psychological difference. This wasn't just survival anymore. He was establishing a presence here. From his sea base, Riley began making longer expeditions. He discovered the kelp forest properly, learning to avoid the stalkers by moving carefully and not threatening them. He found that the stalkers were actually quite intelligent, that they collected scrap metal in their caves, probably for mating displays. He learned he could trade fish for safe passage through their territory. To the east, he found the grassy plateaus, where the terrain dropped off in gentle slopes and the vegetation was different, more open, more exposed. Here, larger creatures hunted. The sand sharks buried themselves in the sand and exploded upward at prey. The gasopods released poisonous clouds when threatened. Riley learned to be cautious, to watch for telltale signs, to always have an escape route. And everywhere, he found fragments of technology that his scanner could analyze, pieces of tools, parts of vehicles, components of sea bases. Each fragment uploaded data to his PDA, and gradually new blueprints emerged. He learned he could build a sea glide for faster underwater travel. Then a sea moth, a small one-person submarine that would revolutionize his exploration capabilities. Building the sea moth required accessing the mobile vehicle bay, which itself required components that took days to gather. Riley found himself falling into a pattern of long-term planning. To build this, he needed that. To get that, he needed to explore there. To explore there safely, he needed better equipment. Each goal led to another, a chain of objectives that kept him focused and moving forward. The day he finally launched his Seamoth was one of mixed emotions. Pride in his accomplishment. He had, with just the resources he could gather alone, built a submarine from raw materials, but also a deeper understanding of his isolation. This level of self-sufficiency meant there was no one coming to help him. If he was going to survive, if he was going to escape, it would be because he did it himself. Part 10. The Aurora's Secrets. With his Seamoth built and a radiation suit fabricated, Riley finally approached the Aurora. The massive ship dominated the horizon, and as he drew closer in his submarine, the true scale of the disaster became apparent. The ship was nearly a kilometer long, and most of that length was torn open or crumpled. Fires still burned in some sections. Sparks cascaded from exposed electrical systems. Riley found a breach in the hull large enough for him to swim through. Inside, the ship was a maze of tilted corridors, collapsed decks, and flooded compartments. Bodies floated in some sections. Crew members he might have known, their faces blank and pale in the emergency lighting. He tried not to look too closely, tried to remember them as they had been in life rather than this. He made his way deeper into the ship, following the directions his PDA provided toward engineering. Along the way, he found supply crates that had survived the crash. Food, water, materials. He took what he could carry. He also found more PDAs, logs from crew members describing their final moments. Some had tried to reach the life pods. Others had been trapped when sections collapsed. All of them had died alone in the dark. The engineering section was the most dangerous part of the ship. Radiation levels were critical here, and fires still raged in places. Riley had to carefully navigate around damaged systems, past unstable deck plating, through corridors where the walls themselves glowed with heat. But, finally, he reached the drive core. The reactor was on the verge of complete meltdown. The containment field was failing, held together by emergency systems that were themselves damaged. Riley accessed the control terminal and saw that he needed to repair 3 major systems: the containment field generators, the coolant systems, and the structural supports. It would take hours of careful work, crawling through irradiated spaces, fabricating replacement parts on the spot. But he did it. Piece by piece, system by system, Riley stabilized the Aurora's drive core. He rerouted power, sealed coolant leaks, reinforced structural weak points, and finally, with the reactor as stable as he could make it, he activated the emergency shutdown sequence. The Aurora's drive core powered down completely. The radiation would still be a problem. It would take years for the contamination to dissipate naturally, but at least it wouldn't get worse. And there would be no catastrophic explosion to worry about. Exhausted, Riley made his way back toward the ship's bow, intending to exit the way he had come. But his PDA detected something, a signal from an undamaged section of the ship. Following it, he found himself in the captain's quarters. And here he discovered something that changed everything. The captain's terminal contained classified files, including the Aurora's true mission parameters. Riley read with growing understanding. The Aurora hadn't just been passing by to look for the Mongolians. The secondary objective, known only to Captain Hollister and CTO Yu, was to locate and retrieve alien technology. Altera had detected energy signatures on this planet that suggested advanced civilization. They wanted that technology. More disturbing were the files about the Mongolians themselves. Altera had known the ship was shot down. They had detected the energy weapon firing from the planet's surface, and they had sent the Aurora anyway, believing a larger ship could withstand the attack, or that the weapon might not fire twice. They had been wrong on both counts. Riley also found personal logs from the captain, messages meant for his family that would never be sent. Entries about his crew, about the pressure from corporate to complete the mission despite the risks, about his doubts. The captain had been a good man, caught between duty and the safety of his people. In the end, it had killed them all. As Riley left the Aurora for the last time, swimming back toward his seamoth in the growing darkness, he realized something important. No rescue was coming. Altera would note the Aurora's destruction, just as they had noted the Mongolians. They might send another ship eventually, but given what happened to the last 2 vessels, probably not any time soon. And even if they did, the planet's defense system would likely shoot it down too. If Riley wanted to get off this planet, he would need to find another way. And that meant understanding this world, understanding what had shot down 2 ships, and finding a way to either disable the weapon or convince whoever built it that he should be allowed to leave. The answers, he knew, lay deeper in the ocean, in the places the Degasi survivors had explored, in the alien ruins his scanner detected but could barely comprehend, in the dark waters where leviathans swam and ancient secrets waited. Riley set his course back toward his sea base, his mind already planning the next phase of exploration. He would need better equipment, a bigger submarine, more supplies, and courage he wasn't sure he had to dive into the depths and discover what terrors and wonders waited below. Part 11. Into the Deep. The days following Riley's expedition into the Aurora were focused on preparation. His PDA had begun receiving strange signals, not distress beacons from life pods, but something else. Coordinates to locations scattered around the crater. Automated messages in a language his PDA could barely translate. Something that seemed to say infected over and over. The first of these signals led him to a strange installation on a small island. The same floating island where the Degasi had built their first base years before. Riley explored the abandoned base, reading the PDAs left behind, learning about Paul, Bart, and Marguerite. He also discovered an alien structure built into the island itself, a massive arch made of the same strange material he'd seen in other ruins, covered in symbols that his scanner struggled to interpret. When Riley approached the arch, it came to life. A platform rose from the ground, and a beam of energy scanned him from head to toe. Then a message appeared in his PDA, translated from whatever ancient language the device used. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. He had been scanned, he had been found infected with something, and he was now bound by quarantine protocols. The message included a designation. He was now listed as Infected Person 5312, or something similar. The number made him shudder. How many people had been scanned by these devices? How long had they been active? More signals followed. Each led to another alien installation, each in a different biome. One was in the kelp forest, built into a cave. Another was on the mountains near where the Aurora had crashed. A third was in the underwater islands, a beautiful area of floating rocks and diverse wildlife. Each structure scanned him, delivered the same infected message, and added to his growing understanding that this planet was under some kind of organized quarantine. But the most important signal led him down, deep down to a place his scanner designated as the Jelly Shroom Caves. Following the Degasi's trail, Riley descended into the bioluminescent cavern system. Here, in the eerie green glow of massive mushroom-like plants, he found the second Degasi base. And here, in their logs, he learned that they had been infected too, that they had been experiencing symptoms, that they had chosen to go even deeper in search of answers. Riley checked his own health readings. His PDA showed some anomalies in his blood work, things that hadn't been there before. Nothing critical yet, but concerning. The realization settled over him like a weight. He wasn't just stranded on an alien planet, he was infected with an alien disease. And unless he found a cure, he would die here, just like the Degasi crew. This changed everything. Escape was no longer just about finding a way past the orbital weapon. He needed to cure himself first, or any escape would be pointless. He would just die in space or infect others when he reached civilization. The quarantine wasn't just keeping him in, it was keeping the disease from spreading beyond this planet. Riley needed to go deeper. The Degasi logs spoke of the Grand Reef, of the Lost River, of structures and mysteries in the depths. His seamoth couldn't handle those pressures. He needed something more robust. The mobile vehicle bay in his sea base had blueprints for a larger submarine, the Cyclops. Building it would be a massive undertaking, requiring resources from all over the crater, some from depths he hadn't yet explored. But it was designed for deep diving, could carry the seamoth inside it, and would serve as a mobile base. It was exactly what he needed. Part 12. The Cyclops and the Lost River. The construction of the Cyclops took weeks. Riley had to explore biomes he'd been avoiding, gather rare materials, and assemble components that were complex even by Altera's standards. The engine required advanced wiring kits. The pressure compensator needed plasteel ingots. The hull alone required tons of titanium and other metals. But finally, piece by piece, the massive submarine took shape in the shallows near his base. When Riley finally christened it and took it on its maiden voyage, he felt a surge of something like hope. This vessel could go places he'd only seen from a distance. This could change everything. He outfitted the Cyclops with everything he might need: fabricators, storage lockers, charging stations for his seamoth, and even a small interior grow bed for food. It wasn't comfortable exactly. The submarine was designed for function, not luxury, but it was safe and capable. It was a home that could go anywhere. Riley charted a course for the Grand Reef, following the trail the Degasi had blazed years before. As he descended past 200 meters, then 300, then 400, the ocean changed. The light from above faded to a dim twilight. Creatures he'd never seen before appeared in his searchlights, some beautiful, some terrifying. The reef itself was unlike anything in the shallows, with massive, membrane-like plants and pillars of rock extending into the darkness below. He found the third Degasi base, abandoned and partially flooded. Their final logs painted a picture of people coming apart under stress and disease. Arguments about what to do next. Marguerite's insistence on exploring deeper. Paul's declining health. Bart caught between them, trying to maintain some semblance of rationality. From the Grand Reef, Riley found the entrance to the Lost River. It was a cavern opening in the sea floor, hidden among the rock formations, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. He took the Cyclops in slowly, carefully, watching his depth gauge climb and his surroundings grow darker. The Lost River was a biome unlike any other. A massive underground river of blue-green brine, denser than water, flowed along the floor of enormous caverns. And throughout the caverns, scattered like forgotten toys, were the skeletons of creatures so massive that Riley had trouble comprehending their scale. The skull of one ancient leviathan was larger than his Cyclops. The rib cage of another could have housed a small building. These weren't ordinary fossils. Something about them was wrong. They glowed faintly, and Riley's scanner detected high levels of radiation and strange energy readings. Whatever had killed these creatures, it had left them in a state of semi-preservation that shouldn't have been possible. As Riley explored the Lost River, he encountered living creatures that were just as unsettling. River prowlers that screamed at him with sounds that hurt to hear. Ghost leviathans, massive and translucent, patrolling the caverns with eerie grace. And worst of all, the warpers, the biomechanical creatures that could teleport and seemed specifically interested in him. When a warper phased next to his Cyclops and scanned it, Riley's PDA received a new message. Threat assessment. Infected person detected. Initiating defensive protocol. The warper tried to phase him out of his submarine, to expose him to the crushing pressure or the creatures outside. Only the Cyclops' shielding prevented it. Riley realized that the warpers weren't natural creatures. They were tools, biological machines designed to detect and eliminate infected individuals. They were part of the quarantine system, the same as the scanning arches and the orbital weapon. This planet wasn't just defended by ancient technology. It was actively policed by creatures specifically designed to kill anyone who carried the disease. Deeper in the Lost River, Riley discovered something that changed his understanding of everything. A massive alien facility, built into the cavern wall, clearly designed for research. The Disease Research Facility, his PDA labeled it. And inside, if he could find a way in, might be answers about the infection and how to cure it. But there was a problem. The facility was locked down, requiring some kind of access code or key that Riley didn't have. He explored around it, finding data terminals that his PDA could partially translate. They spoke of a pathogen, of research subjects, of failed attempts to find a cure. They mentioned a primary containment facility, deeper still, where the specimen was kept. Riley understood then that he was following a trail left by whoever had built all this. They had studied the disease here, in this facility. And when they failed to find a cure here, they had gone deeper, to the primary containment facility. If he wanted answers, if he wanted to cure himself and escape this planet, he needed to go all the way down. He mapped the cavern system carefully, finding his way to the deep end of the Lost River. And there, at the bottom of the cave system, he found another passage downward. This one was even more ominous, a massive tunnel carved through the rock, leading into depths that his instruments could barely measure. Heat signatures suggested volcanic activity. Seismic readings indicated a massive cavity below, even larger than the Lost River itself. This was the inactive lava zone, his PDA informed him. And somewhere in those superheated depths was the primary containment facility. Riley returned to his Cyclops, checked his power reserves, his food and water supplies, his equipment. Everything he would need for an extended expedition into the deepest, most dangerous waters on the planet. He sat in the captain's chair for a long moment, looking at the tunnel entrance, thinking about how far he'd come from that first day in his life pod. Then he pushed the throttle forward, and the Cyclops descended into the darkness and heat of the planet's interior. Part 13. The Lava Zones. The inactive lava zone was a realm of fire and stone beneath the ocean. Rivers of magma flowed along the floor of enormous caverns. Steam vents erupted from fissures in the rock. The water itself was hot enough to damage the Cyclops' hull if Riley wasn't careful about his depth and proximity to the lava flows. The creatures here were adapted to the extreme environment. Lava larvae attached themselves to the Cyclops, draining power and requiring constant removal. Lava lizards swam through the superheated water with ease, attacking anything they perceived as prey. And patrolling the caverns were massive sea dragons, Leviathan-class predators that breathed fire and were large enough to attack even the Cyclops. Riley learned to be careful, to move slowly, to avoid the sea dragons when possible, and to have escape routes planned when it wasn't. The Cyclops could take a beating, but it wasn't invincible. A sustained attack from a sea dragon could breach the hull, and down here, that would be fatal. As he explored the lava zones, Riley found more alien structures, power plants that had been running for hundreds or thousands of years, still generating energy from the magma flows. Data terminals that spoke of the planet's history, of the disease, of the desperate research to find a cure. And everywhere, signs that whoever built all this had ultimately failed. The logs he found painted a picture of a civilization in crisis. They spoke of a bacterium brought to this world by accident, of an outbreak that spread through the local ecosystem with terrifying speed. They spoke of team members falling ill, of research subjects dying, of quarantine protocols being enacted. The translation was imperfect, but the desperation was clear in every entry. One terminal mentioned the specimen at the primary containment facility, a creature that was immune to the bacterium, whose enzyme could potentially be used to create a cure. But the researchers had been unable to synthesize the enzyme in sufficient quantities. Something about captivity had weakened its potency. Riley followed the clues deeper to the absolute bottom of the lava zones. And there, built into the wall of a massive magma chamber, he found it, the primary containment facility. It was enormous, clearly the most important structure the aliens had built on this planet. And, unlike the disease research facility, this one still had power. This one was still active. The entrance required a specific key, an ion cube of unusual composition that Riley had to locate in the surrounding area. Finding it meant exploring the most dangerous parts of the lava zones, avoiding sea dragons, gathering specific resources. But eventually, he had what he needed. As Riley approached the facility's entrance with the ion cube, the massive door began to open. And from inside, he felt something. Not a physical sensation, but something in his mind. A presence, a consciousness reaching out, ancient and patient and profoundly sad. Someone was still alive inside the facility, or something was, and it had been waiting a very long time for someone to arrive. Part 14. The Sea Emperor. Riley entered the primary containment facility cautiously, his sea moth's lights cutting through the dim interior. The facility was vast, a multi-level structure built around a central aquarium tank of staggering size. And in that tank, swimming slowly through the water, was the most beautiful creature Riley had ever seen. The Sea Emperor was massive, easily 100 meters long, though it was hard to judge accurately in the filtered light. She had multiple limbs that might have been fins or arms, a body that seemed to shimmer with bioluminescence, and eyes that regarded Riley with unmistakable intelligence. And she spoke to him. Not in words exactly, but in thoughts that appeared in his mind with perfect clarity. She was telepathic, capable of communication far more direct than anything Riley had experienced. "At last," she said, though the concept was more complex than that simple phrase. "Someone comes, someone who might listen, someone who might help." Through the Sea Emperor's memories, shared in an instant that felt like hours, Riley learned the truth of Planet 4546b, the architects who had built all this, their search for a cure to their own extinction, her capture and imprisonment, the death of countless of her children, eggs that failed to hatch in captivity because the conditions weren't right, because she was stressed and confined and unable to care for them as nature intended. She showed him her last eggs, 5 of them, kept in special incubation tanks within the facility. These were her last chance, she explained. The architects were long gone, all of them dead, their species extinct despite all their efforts. But she remained, kept alive by the facility's automated systems, waiting for someone who might understand what the architects had not. "My children must hatch naturally," she communicated. "They must be born in the right place with the right care, free as they were meant to be. Only then will they produce the enzyme in its full potency. Only then can the cure be made." Riley asked her about the disease, about the quarantine, about everything he had seen. She answered patiently, explaining that the bacterium was dying off slowly without new hosts, but it remained in the environment. She explained that the architects had programmed the quarantine system to remain active until the bacterium was eradicated. As long as it existed, as long as creatures on this planet were infected, the orbital weapon would prevent anyone from leaving. "But you can help," she told him. "You can give my children what I cannot: freedom, natural environment, the volcanic vents where my kind have always hatched. In return, the enzyme they produce will cure you, will cure this world, will shut down the quarantine." She showed him what he needed to do. There were specific conditions required for hatching her eggs. Certain nutrients, specific temperature ranges, the right mineral composition in the water. All of it could be found on the planet, but it would require Riley to explore further, to gather rare materials, to prepare carefully. "But understand this," the Sea Emperor warned him. "I am dying. The facility's systems have kept me alive far beyond my natural span. When my children hatch, when I know they will survive, I will finally be able to rest. You will have one chance to gather the enzyme they produce. Do not waste it." Riley agreed. What else could he do? This was his only hope for cure, for escape, for survival. The Emperor had been a prisoner for so long, forced to watch her children die over and over. If he could give her this final peace and save himself in the process, he would do whatever was necessary. He left the facility with a new sense of purpose. The Emperor had shown him where to look for the materials he needed, specific plants that grew only in certain biomes, rare minerals found in the depths, and, most importantly, the location where her eggs needed to be hatched. A specific volcanic vent system in the lava zones where the temperature and mineral content were exactly right. Part 15. Hatching Hope. The next weeks were the most challenging of Riley's time on Planet 4546b. He had a clear objective now, but achieving it required him to push his limits and his equipment beyond what he thought possible. First, he needed to establish a base near the hatching site. This meant building in the lava zones, in water hot enough to damage his equipment, with sea dragons patrolling nearby. He chose a location carefully, built a small outpost with reinforced thermal protection, and stocked it with everything he would need. Then came the gathering phase. The Emperor had given him a list, translated roughly by his PDA into scientific terms. He needed samples from specific plants: ghostweed from the Lost River, blood oil from the blood kelp zones, and others scattered across the planet. Some were easy to gather. Others required him to venture into the most dangerous biomes, places he'd been avoiding because of the creatures that lived there. The hardest part was preparing the hatching enzymes. The Emperor's eggs needed a specific compound to properly hatch, something that had to be synthesized from the plants and materials he'd gathered. Riley set up a series of fabrication sequences, cross-checking the recipes the Emperor had shown him with his PDA's analysis. It took several attempts to get it right. While he worked, Riley continued to explore the facility, finding more of the architect's logs. He learned their names, or at least approximations of them. He read about their desperate final days, their regret at what they had done to the Emperor, their hope that someone might come who could succeed where they had failed. One log in particular stayed with him. It was from the last living architect, written in the moments before they died. They spoke of their species' extinction being assured, but hoped that the quarantine would at least prevent them from spreading the disease to other worlds. They spoke of the Emperor with something that might have been affection or might have been respect. And they ended with a simple message, directed at no one in particular. May those who come after learn from our mistakes. Finally, Riley had everything he needed. He transported the eggs carefully from the containment facility to the hatching site. Each one was massive, almost as large as a person, with a shell that glowed faintly with internal light. He placed them carefully in the volcanic vents, in the exact arrangement the Emperor had specified, and then added the hatching enzyme. The effect was immediate. The eggs began to pulse with light, growing brighter and brighter. Riley backed away, giving them space, watching through his Seamuth's viewport as something extraordinary happened. One by one, the eggs cracked, and from them emerged baby sea emperors, each one about the size of a large fish but clearly recognizable as miniature versions of their mother. They swam uncertainly at first, then with growing confidence, exploring their environment with obvious curiosity. And as they swam, they released a cloud of enzyme into the water. Riley's PDA detected it immediately. The same compound he'd been reading about in the architect's logs, but thousands of times more concentrated. This was what the architects had been trying to create. This was the cure. Riley collected samples of the enzyme carefully, filling special containment units his fabricator had created. As he worked, he felt the Emperor's presence in his mind one last time. "Thank you," she communicated, and the emotion behind the thought was overwhelming. "My children will live, the ocean will heal, and you are free." Riley tried to respond, to tell her she was welcome, to thank her for her patience and sacrifice. But the connection faded gently, like the Emperor was falling asleep after a very long vigil. He returned to the containment facility one more time, taking his samples of the cure with him. The great tank was still, the water calm. The Sea Emperor floated at the bottom, her eyes closed, her body at peace. She had finally, after 1,000 years of captivity and suffering, been able to rest. Riley fabricated the cure in the facility's medical bay, using the Emperor's enzyme as the base. The injection was simple, just a standard medical dispenser applying the compound to his bloodstream. But the effect was profound. Within seconds, his PDA's medical scanner showed the infection being neutralized, destroyed at a cellular level by the enzyme, Within minutes, he was clear, cured, free of the disease that had been slowly killing him. But he wasn't done yet. The quarantine was still active, and Riley still needed to get off this planet. Part 16. The Quarantine Platform. The Emperor had shown Riley one more thing before she died: the location of the Quarantine Enforcement Platform's control center. It was on the surface, built into the mountains near where the Aurora had crashed. And now that he was cured, now that he had the enzyme to prove the disease had been eliminated, he could deactivate the quarantine. Reaching the platform required ascending from the depths, a journey that felt symbolic after so long going downward. Riley took the Cyclops up through the lava zones, through the Lost River, and finally back into the shallower waters of the crater. The journey that had taken weeks to descend took only hours to reverse, now that he knew the way. The Quarantine Enforcement Platform was a massive structure built into the mountainside. A single enormous cannon pointed skyward, its barrel large enough to fly a ship through. Around it, power conduits, sensor arrays, and defensive systems that were still active after a millennium. This was the weapon that had destroyed the Mongolians and the Aurora. This was what had kept everyone trapped here. Riley found the entrance to the facility, sealed but responsive to his scanner. Inside, the structure was pristine, maintained by automated systems that had never failed. Alien architecture surrounded him, strange organic technology, walls that looked grown rather than built, lighting that had no clear source. He navigated to the central control room, following the directions the Emperor had given him. And there, he found the master terminal. His PDA worked to translate the interface, the architect language slowly becoming comprehensible through the database he'd accumulated. The terminal showed the status of the quarantine: threat level, minimal but present. Infected specimens, decreasing. Cure available, negative. Quarantine status, active. Riley input the cure data, uploading the enzyme analysis from his PDA. The terminal processed the information, running through what must have been ancient verification protocols. And then, finally, the status changed. Cure available, confirmed. Threat level, contained. Quarantine protocol, disengaging. Deep within the platform, massive power systems began to shut down. The weapon that had destroyed 2 ships powered down, its reactors entering standby mode for the first time in 1,000 years. Warning lights switched from red to green, and a final message appeared on the terminal, both on the alien display and translated in Riley's PDA. Quarantine lifted. Self-warping device enabled. Specimen 5312 cleared for departure. Self-warping device? Riley explored further into the facility, finding a chamber he'd missed on his way in. And there, in the center of the room, was a platform surrounded by ancient technology. It was a gateway, a portal, built by the architects. One of their last achievements, meant to be used by whoever finally cured the plague. The terminal here showed coordinates. A planet thousands of light years away. An Altera colony where Riley could report the Aurora's fate and arrange transport home. All he had to do was step onto the platform. But Riley hesitated. Was he really ready to leave? He had spent months on this planet, learned its secrets, explored its depths. He had built bases, crafted technology, survived against impossible odds. This place had tried to kill him countless times, but it had also been his home. More importantly, what about the cure? The Emperor's enzyme could help so many people. And someone needed to tell the story of what happened here, of the architects and their mistakes, of the quarantine and why it had been necessary. Riley made a decision. He would return to his bases, gather everything important, the enzyme samples, the PDA data, the research he'd accumulated. He would make sure the cure could be replicated, that the Emperor's sacrifice and the architect's legacy wouldn't be forgotten. And he would prepare a proper departure. It took another week. Riley visited each of his bases, collecting his research, saying goodbye in his own way to the places he'd built. He returned to the floating island where the Degasi had made their first stand. He swam through the safe shallows where he'd first learned to survive. He took the Cyclops one last time through the caverns of the Lost River, past the bones of ancient leviathans, acknowledging the journey he'd made. Finally, equipped with everything he could carry, with the cure secured in a stasis container, with his PDA full of data and discoveries, Riley returned to the quarantine enforcement platform. He stood on the transport platform, entered the coordinates, and activated the system. The ancient architect technology hummed to life. Energy built around the platform, forming a bubble of warped space. Riley watched as Planet 4546b, the ocean, the sky, the Aurora's wreckage on the horizon, began to fade. And then, in a flash of light that felt like both an instant and an eternity, he was somewhere else. The coordinates had been accurate. He stood on a landing pad on an Altera colony world, where emergency crews were already approaching, attracted by the unauthorized warp signature. Riley Robinson had escaped. He had survived. And he carried with him the cure for the Kharaa bacterium, along with the story of an ancient species mistake and an imprisoned emperor's final gift. But our story isn't quite over yet, because while Riley was making his escape, something else was happening on Planet 4546b, in the depths he'd left behind. The Emperor's children were growing, swimming through the oceans, releasing their enzyme into the water. And slowly, gradually, the infection that had plagued this world for so long was being purged from every creature, every plant, every drop of water. Part 17. Below Zero, a New Arrival. 5 years after Riley Robinson's escape from Planet 4546b, Altera Corporation made an important decision. The planet, once under strict quarantine, was now officially confirmed as safe. The Emperor enzyme had worked. The Kharaa bacterium was gone, eliminated by the natural spread of the cure through the ecosystem. The orbital weapon had been permanently disabled, and Altera saw opportunity. They established Research Station Delta, also known as Sector 0, on an Arctic region of the planet far from the crater where Riley had survived. This sector was on the planet's polar region, where the water was frozen at the surface and the ecosystem was completely different from the tropical crater. New species, new resources, new opportunities for profit and research. The research station was substantial. Multiple habitats, vehicles, research equipment, and a staff of scientists and support personnel. They studied the local wildlife, the unique adaptations of Arctic creatures, the mineral deposits beneath the ice. They also continued research on the Kharaa cure, hoping to understand it well enough to synthesize it without depending on the Emperor's children. Among the research staff was a xenobiologist named Lillian A.U. She had come to Planet 4546b specifically because of its alien architecture, the architect ruins that had been discovered across the planet. She believed there was more to learn about this ancient civilization, that their technology could benefit humanity in countless ways. But Altera had different priorities. While some research on the architects was permitted, the corporation was more interested in exploiting the planet's natural resources. Lillian found her work increasingly constrained, her proposals for expanded archaeological research denied, her requests for additional time to study the ruins dismissed. The situation came to a head when Lillian discovered something extraordinary. In the mountains near Sector Zero, partially buried in ancient ice, she had found what appeared to be an architect facility that predated even the ones in the crater. And inside that facility, she believed there was technology that could answer fundamental questions about the architects, who they were, where they came from, and what had ultimately happened to their civilization. Altera's response was swift and brutal. They ordered Lillian to cease her investigation. When she refused, they manufactured a reason to fire her and ordered her off the planet. The corporation's official position was that Lillian had violated safety protocols and endangered the research station. The real reason was that she had become inconvenient, asking questions that didn't contribute to Altera's bottom line. Lillian Au left Sector Zero under protest, but she didn't give up. Before departing, she secretly copied all her research data and transmitted it to someone she trusted. Her sister, Robin Au, an engineer who had worked for Altera before retiring. If anyone could follow up on Lillian's research, it would be Robin. 2 weeks after Lillian left Planet 4546b, Altera received a distress signal from an exploration team she had insisted on sending to the remote facility one last time. There had been an accident, a catastrophic one, and Lillian Au was dead. That was the official story. But Robin Au didn't believe it. Her sister had been too careful, too experienced, too determined to die in a simple accident. And the circumstances were suspicious. No bodies recovered, no detailed incident report, just a terse notification from Altera that Lillian had died in service to the company. Robin made a decision that would change her life. She would go to Planet 4546b herself. She would find out what really happened to her sister. And if Altera had something to do with Lillian's death, she would expose them. Getting to the planet was relatively easy. Robin still had credentials from her time with Altera, and she knew how to navigate their bureaucratic systems. She boarded a supply ship heading to Sector Zero under a false manifest, hiding among cargo and automated systems until the ship was too far from civilization for them to turn back. But Robin's arrival was not as planned. The supply ship encountered an unexpected storm as it approached the planet. Violent winds that shouldn't have existed according to the weather predictions. The ship was damaged, forced to make an emergency landing far from Sector Zero. And Robin, trapped in the cargo bay when the ship went down, had to evacuate quickly. She escaped the wreckage in an emergency life pod, similar to the ones that had saved Riley years before. But this time, the crash was in Arctic waters, beneath ice sheets and in freezing temperatures. Robin's pod hit the water and immediately began taking on freezing water. She scrambled to deploy her cold suit, a specialized environment suit designed for Arctic conditions, and escaped the pod just as it sank into the dark waters below the ice. Robin surfaced in an alien world of ice and snow. The landscape was beautiful but deadly. Towering icebergs, frozen channels, and beneath it all, an ocean that was just barely liquid, kept from freezing by thermal vents and underground volcanic activity. She was alone, far from the research station, with minimal supplies and no way to call for help without alerting Altera to her presence. But Robin was an engineer, trained to solve problems and survive in hostile environments. She activated her habitat builder and began to create shelter. She scanned the local resources and started gathering materials, and she began to explore this frozen section of Planet 4546b, searching for answers about what had happened to her sister. Part 18. The Frozen World. The Arctic region of Planet 4546b was vastly different from the tropical crater where Riley had survived. Here, the surface was covered in thick ice, with only occasional open water channels. The ecosystem had adapted to the extreme cold, with creatures that had natural antifreeze in their blood and plants that could photosynthesize using the dim light that penetrated through ice. Robin quickly learned that survival here required different strategies than what Riley had needed. The cold was a constant enemy. Even with her cold suit, prolonged exposure to the water or air could be fatal. She needed to carefully manage her body temperature, seeking out thermal vents and warm water pockets whenever possible. The creatures here were strange and often dangerous: pinnacarids, predatory seals that hunted beneath the ice; snowstalkers, aggressive pack hunters that patrolled the frozen surface; and in the deeper waters, larger predators that Robin learned to avoid through careful observation and planning. But Robin also discovered beauty in this harsh environment: bioluminescent creatures that lit up the dark waters beneath the ice, massive ice formations that twisted into impossible shapes, underwater caverns filled with mineral formations that seemed to glow with inner light. This wasn't just a frozen wasteland. It was an ecosystem as rich and diverse as anything Riley had encountered in the crater. As Robin explored, she found evidence of Altera's presence: abandoned equipment, research stations that had been hastily evacuated, supply caches hidden in caves. But she also found something more concerning: security measures that seemed designed to keep people out of certain areas, not just to protect the researchers from dangerous wildlife. What was Altera hiding? Robin's PDA, synced with Altera's network despite her unauthorized status, began picking up data fragments and logs from the research station. She learned about Lillian's work, about the ancient architect facility her sister had discovered, and about the escalating conflict between Lillian and Altera's management. One log in particular caught Robin's attention. It was from Lillian, recorded just days before her supposed death. In it, Lillian spoke about a discovery she'd made: something inside the architect facility that Altera had forbidden her from investigating further. Something that frightened her, but also excited her, because it suggested the architects had been working on something extraordinary before they died out. "I think they found a way to upload consciousness," Lillian said in the recording. "Not just transfer it between bodies like they'd done before, but to preserve it indefinitely in a digital substrate. If I'm right, there might be architects stored in these facilities, waiting to be reactivated. We could talk to them, learn from them, understand their technology directly from its creators." The log ended with Lillian saying she was going to the facility one more time, with or without Altera's permission. It was dated the day before her death was reported. Robin knew what she had to do. She needed to reach that facility. needed to find out what Lillian had discovered and whether it had gotten her sister killed. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The facility was deep in the mountains, in an area called the Frozen Caverns, a network of ice caves that extended down into geothermal zones beneath the Arctic surface. Robin began preparing for the journey. She fabricated a seat ruck, a modular vehicle designed for Arctic exploration. She gathered supplies, crafted better tools, and studied the terrain. And she listened to more of Lillian's logs, piecing together her sister's last days on this planet. As Robin worked, she encountered another presence on the planet, an AI named Al-An. Or, at least, that's what Robin would come to call him. The first contact happened when Robin was exploring a particular architect facility, one built into an iceberg that had been carved out with impossible precision. She was scanning a data terminal when suddenly information began flooding into her PDA. Not normal data, but something alive, something conscious. Robin felt a presence enter her mind, not hostile but undeniably alien, and she heard thoughts that weren't her own. Finally, after so long, someone who can hear, someone who can help. Robin nearly dropped her scanner. Who? What are you? I am an architect, the presence responded, the concepts translating roughly into language Robin could understand. My people called me Al-An, though that is an approximation. I have been stored here in this facility's databanks for over 1,000 years, waiting, hoping that someone would come who could restore me. Part 19. Al-An's Story. Through the connection they now shared, an involuntary bond created when Al-An had downloaded a portion of his consciousness into Robin's PDA. The architect told his story. Al-An had been part of the research team studying the Kharaa Outbreak 1,000 years ago. He was not a scientist, but an architect, an engineer, someone who built and maintained the facilities his people used. When the outbreak reached its critical phase, when it became clear that the architects on planet 4546b were going to die, they made a desperate decision. They would preserve themselves digitally, uploading their consciousness into data storage units built into their facilities. The hope was that someday someone would come. Either another architect expedition or an alien species advanced enough to understand their technology, who could download them into new bodies, or at least preserve their knowledge. Al-An had been one of the first to upload, but something had gone wrong with the storage facility. Some of his fellow architects' data had been corrupted. Others had simply degraded over the centuries. By the time Robin activated the terminal, Al-An was the only consciousness that remained intact. I am the last of my people, Al-An communicated, and Robin could feel the weight of that statement, the loneliness of being the final survivor of an entire civilization. And I am incomplete. Only a portion of my consciousness exists in your storage device. The rest of me is scattered across this facility and others on this planet. Al-An explained that to fully restore himself, he would need Robin's help. She would need to explore other architect facilities in Sector 0, retrieve data components, and eventually construct a new body for him using technology that the architects had left behind. In return, Al-An offered, I will help you find answers about your sister. I have access to this planet's data networks, including Altera's. I know what happened in these facilities, and I suspect I know why your sister died. Robin was hesitant. Having an alien consciousness, even a partial one, Sharing space in her PDA was unsettling, but she also recognized the opportunity. Alan had knowledge she needed, and more importantly, he had a perspective on events that no one else could provide. Okay, Robin agreed. We help each other. You get your body, I get answers about Lillian. Deal? Your concept of reciprocal agreement is understood and acceptable, Alan confirmed. Let us begin. Over the following weeks, Robin and Alan worked together. He guided her to other architect facilities scattered across Sector 0, places that Lillian had discovered but never fully explored. Each facility held pieces of Alan's stored consciousness, data modules that Robin carefully extracted and integrated into her PDA. As they worked, Robin learned more about the architects. Their civilization had been vast, spanning many star systems. They had been logical, efficient, focused on long-term survival rather than short-term pleasures. They had lived for thousands of years by transferring their consciousness between bodies, seeing death as merely a temporary inconvenience. But they had also been capable of great mistakes. The Kharaa Outbreak was entirely their fault. They had brought the bacterium to planet 4546b through carelessness, then compounded the error by imprisoning the Sea Emperor rather than respecting her needs. Their desperate focus on their own survival had blinded them to the suffering they caused. Alan spoke of these events with what Robin interpreted as regret, though alien emotions were hard to read. We were so certain of our superiority, he communicated, so confident that our technology and logic could solve any problem. We never considered that the solution might require something as simple as empathy, as basic as letting a mother care for her children freely. Robin also learned about her sister's final days from Alan's perspective. He had observed Lillian's visits to the architect facilities, had watched her work through security cameras and sensors that had been recording for centuries. He confirmed what Robin suspected. Lillian had not died in an accident. Your sister discovered information that Altera wanted suppressed, Alan explained. She found evidence of illegal research being conducted here, experiments that violated transgov laws. When she threatened to report this, certain individuals within Altera's management decided she was a liability. Who? Robin demanded. Who killed her? I do not have direct evidence of the act, Alan admitted. But the orders came from someone high in Altera's hierarchy on this planet, and the execution was carried out to look like an accident. Your sister's air supply was sabotaged during an expedition to a deep facility. She drowned in an underwater cave, and the evidence was destroyed. Robin felt cold fury settle over her. She had suspected, but hearing it confirmed was different. Altera had murdered her sister, and they had covered it up, confident that no one would ever discover the truth. Then we make them pay, Robin said. But first, we need evidence. Real evidence that even Altera can't deny or bury. Alan agreed. The facilities contain full records of Altera's activities in this sector. If we can access the central data core in the primary research laboratory, we can retrieve everything: logs, video footage, orders, communications. Everything needed to expose what happened. They had a plan now. Continue gathering Alan's data components. Build him a new body using the architect's technology. And, simultaneously, infiltrate Altera's primary research facility to gather evidence of Lillian's murder and whatever illegal activities they were conducting. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal. But Robin had come to this planet for answers and justice. She wasn't leaving without both. Part 20. The bodybuilder restoring Alan required building him a new body, but not just any body. An architect body using technology that was over 1,000 years old. Robin needed specific components, materials that were rare even on a planet as resource-rich as 4546b. Alan guided her to various locations where the necessary materials could be found. Some were in deep underwater caves beneath the ice. Others were in thermal vents where the water was hot enough to boil. A few required Robin to venture onto the frozen surface, where the temperature could kill her in minutes without proper protection. The most challenging component was what Al-An called an enzyme, but which was different from the Emperor's cure. This substance was required to stabilize the bodybuilding process, and it could only be obtained from a specific deep-sea creature, the frozen leviathan. The frozen leviathan was exactly what it sounded like. A massive creature, possibly even larger than the Sea Emperor, that had been frozen in ice for thousands of years. It was located in a research facility that Altera had built around it, studying the creature and trying to extract various compounds from its still-preserved tissues. Breaking into that facility was risky. Altera had security measures, automated defenses, and regular patrols. But Robin had become skilled at infiltration during her weeks in Sector Zero, and with Alan's help in bypassing electronic security, they managed to enter the facility. The frozen leviathan was a sight to behold, trapped in a massive block of ice, perfectly preserved, its body showing the same green pustules that marked Kharaa infection. This creature had been infected long ago, before the cure existed. It had died and frozen before the bacterium could fully consume it. Your kind is extracting samples from the creature, Al-An observed, accessing the facility's data. They are trying to recreate the Kharaa bacterium for research purposes. Robin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. They're doing what? After everything that happened, after the quarantine, after all those deaths, Altera is trying to weaponize the disease? The stated purpose is defensive research, Alan clarified, creating vaccines and treatments in case a similar pathogen is encountered elsewhere. But the methodology suggests other applications are being considered. This was it. This was the illegal research Lillian had discovered. Bioweapon development disguised as defensive research, conducted far from oversight, in violation of multiple Transgov treaties. No wonder Altera had wanted to keep it quiet. Robin gathered the samples she needed, including the enzyme from the Leviathan's tissues. But she also copied all of Altera's research data, downloading files that documented everything they'd been doing in this facility. This would be part of the evidence that would expose them. With all the components finally gathered, Robin and Alan returned to a specific architect facility that contained bodybuilding technology. The process was complex, requiring Robin to carefully integrate each component into a fabrication device that was more organic than technological, more grown than built. The construction took hours, with Alan guiding Robin through each step. Energy flowed through the device, arranging matter at the molecular level, constructing bone and tissue and neurological pathways according to patterns programmed 1,000 years ago. It was beautiful and terrifying to watch. Life being created from raw materials through technology that humans could barely understand. Finally, the process completed. The device opened, revealing the form within. Al-An's new body stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 powerful limbs, 4 eyes arranged around a streamlined head, and skin that seemed to shift colors subtly in the light. He looked alien, clearly not human, but there was undeniable grace to his form. For a moment, the body remained motionless. Then the eyes opened, and Al-An took his first breath in over 1,000 years. He moved experimentally, testing limbs that felt familiar yet strange after so long existing only as data. Success? Al-An spoke, this time with actual vocal cords rather than just thoughts transmitted to Robin's PDA. His voice was resonant, with unusual harmonics that didn't quite match human speech patterns. I am whole again. I am alive. Robin watched with mixed emotions. She had helped restore the last member of an extinct species, had given him a second chance at life. But she had also just enabled a being whose people had caused tremendous harm through their arrogance and mistakes. "So, what now?" Robin asked. "You're alive again. What will you do?" Al-An was quiet for a long moment, adjusting to having a body again, processing experiences that had been denied him for so long. Finally, he turned his 4 eyes toward Robin. "I will help you complete your mission," he said. "We will expose what Altera has done. We will ensure your sister's death is not forgotten. And then I must decide what it means to be the last of one's kind." Part 21. The evidence, with Al-An restored, and the evidence of illegal research gathered, Robin and Al-An planned their infiltration of Altera's central research facility. Outpost Zero, the main habitation and administrative center for the entire sector. Getting in would be challenging. Security was tight, and Robin was technically a trespasser on the planet. But Al-An's restored body came with advantages. His people's technology included abilities that seemed almost like magic compared to human engineering. He could interface directly with architect systems, bypass security measures that were designed with only human technology in mind, and access data networks that Altera didn't even know existed on this planet. They approached Outpost Zero at night, when the facility was operating with minimal staff. Using a combination of Robin's infiltration skills and Al-An's technological abilities, they bypassed the external security and entered through a maintenance access point. Inside, the facility was eerily quiet. Most of the research staff were sleeping or working in isolated lab sections. Robin made her way to the central data core, the main server where Altera stored all their research data, personnel records, and communications. The security here was more sophisticated, but Al-An worked his way through it systematically. He was clearly rusty after 1,000 years of storage, but his understanding of technology far exceeded anything Altera had anticipated. Within minutes, he had gained access to the system. Downloading everything, Al-An communicated. Personnel records, research logs, communications between this facility and Altera's corporate headquarters, financial transactions that reveal funding for prohibited research, and he paused. Video footage from the day your sister died. Robin's hands clenched. "Show me." Al-An hesitated. "Are you certain? It will not be easy to witness." "Show me," Robin insisted. The video played on a nearby screen. It showed Lillian in a diving suit exploring an underwater architect facility, the same one where she had found evidence of Al-An's stored consciousness. She was documenting her findings, excited about the implications of what she'd discovered. Then a second figure appeared in the frame. Another person in a dive suit, approaching from behind. There was no audio, but the body language was clear. They were arguing about something. Lillian was refusing to back down, pointing at her PDA where she'd apparently stored evidence of Altera's illegal activities. The other person grabbed Lillian's air supply connector, and there was a brief struggle. Lillian tried to stop them, but the sabotage was quick and efficient. Whoever this was had training. Her air supply was cut, an override code entered to prevent emergency backup systems from engaging. Robin watched her sister panic, watched her try to surface but not have enough time, watched her drown in the cold Arctic waters. She watched until the body stopped struggling and sank into the depths. And she watched as the murderer retrieved Lillian's PDA, leaving no evidence of foul play. "I'm sorry," Alan said quietly. Robin said nothing for a moment, processing what she'd seen. Then, "Can you identify the person in the other suit?" "Yes." Cross-referencing dive suit serial numbers with personnel logs, Alan paused. The suit was assigned to the facility's head of security, a man named Parvan Ivanov. Further research shows he received a substantial bonus shortly after your sister's death was reported. And there are encrypted communications between him and Altera's regional director, discussing handling the Lillian AU problem. Robin had her answers. She had proof. She had everything she needed to expose what happened and make Altera pay for what they'd done. But looking at the screen, at the final moments of her sister's life, she felt only emptiness. Justice wouldn't bring Lillian back. Exposing Altera wouldn't undo the murder. But it was all Robin could do now. The only way to honor her sister's memory and ensure that this kind of corporate killing didn't happen again. "Copy everything," Robin ordered. "Every file, every video, every communication. We're going to send it everywhere, to TransGov, to independent media, to every regulatory body and watchdog group in known space. Altera is going to regret ever coming to this planet." Al-An worked efficiently, copying petabytes of data into storage devices that Robin had brought. The download took nearly an hour, during which time they had several close calls with security patrols. But finally, it was done. "We have everything," Al-An confirmed. "Enough evidence to not only expose what happened to your sister, but to shut down Altera's operations on this planet entirely. Possibly even to bring criminal charges against multiple levels of their corporate hierarchy." "Good," Robin said. "Now let's get out of here before they realize we've been here." They retreated the way they'd come, moving quickly through the facility. Behind them, Al-An left a little surprise, a timed release of the data dump to Altera's own communication systems. In a few hours, when the staff woke up and checked their messages, they would find that every piece of evidence had been distributed throughout their network. By the time they tried to delete it, copies would already be spreading to external servers. As Robin and Al-An emerged into the frozen night, heading back toward Robin's base, she felt a strange sense of completion. She had come to planet 4546b seeking answers about her sister's death. She had found those answers, along with so much more. An alien civilization's tragic history, the last survivor of that civilization, and evidence that would shake one of humanity's largest corporations. But she had also found something else, something she hadn't expected. In working with Al-An, in helping him restore his life while he helped her seek justice, she had found a kind of understanding across species. The architects had made terrible mistakes, but they were not monsters. They were people, in their own way, who had struggled and failed and tried to do better. And now, Al-An was the only one left to carry that legacy forward. Part 22. Departure and Legacy. With the evidence secured and transmitted, Robin and Al-An faced their final challenge, leaving Planet 4546b. Altera's transportation network was out of the question now that they were effectively fugitives. Commercial vessels wouldn't be arriving for months. They needed another way. Alan had a solution. The architects had built more than one warp gate on this planet. While the quarantine enforcement platform had contained the main one, there were smaller gates designed for emergency use, including one in Sector 0 that Al-An knew about. With his restored body and knowledge, he could activate it. "Where will it send us?" Robin asked. "To an architect facility on another world," Al-An explained. "Not part of human space, not charted by your people. From there, you can use conventional means to reach a transgov colony and make your evidence public. I will continue my journey elsewhere." Robin looked at him, this alien being she'd helped restore. "What will you do? You're the last of your kind. Where will you go?" Al-An was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know," he admitted. "My people are gone. Our civilization is extinct, but I am alive, and that means I must find a purpose. Perhaps I will search for others of my kind who might still exist in distant corners of space. Perhaps I will study the younger species, like yours, and try to ensure you do not repeat our mistakes. Or perhaps I will simply explore. Experience existence without the burden of my people's failing mission." "You're welcome to stay with me," Robin offered. "With humans, I mean. We're not perfect, but we're still learning. And maybe having someone who remembers a civilization's mistakes could help us avoid making similar ones." Alan turned his 4 eyes toward her. "That is kind of you, and perhaps I will take you up on that offer eventually. But first, I need time alone, to process what has happened, to mourn my people properly, to decide who I am when I am no longer part of a civilization, just an individual." Robin understood. She gathered her belongings, including the storage devices containing all the evidence about Lillian's murder and Altera's illegal research. Together, she and Al-An traveled to the ancient warp gate he had mentioned, a structure built into a mountain in the deepest part of Sector 0. The gate was magnificent even after 1,000 years, a massive arch covered in symbols that glowed with inner light. Al-An approached it with something like reverence, placing his hand against the control interface. The technology responded to him immediately, recognizing him as an architect, awakening systems that had been dormant for centuries. "The coordinates are set," Alan announced. "You will arrive at an architect outpost that has been abandoned for millennia. From there, standard warp gates can take you to the nearest transgov settlement." Robin stepped onto the platform, then paused. "Thank you," she said, "for helping me find the truth about Lillian, and for trusting me to help you." "The gratitude is mutual," Alan replied. "You gave me life again. That is a debt I can never fully repay. But I can offer you something else. Knowledge." He touched Robin's PDA, transferring information. "These are the coordinates of other architect facilities in known space. places where my people stored knowledge, technology, art. If humanity is wise, you will learn from what you find there. If you are not, well, at least you will understand what happens when a species loses its way. Robin nodded, accepting the gift. Then, will I see you again? Perhaps, Alan said. The universe is vast, but not so vast that our paths cannot cross again. And I find I would like that. It would be good to have someone who understands what I am, what I've lost, what I carry forward. The gate powered up fully, energy crackling around the arch. Robin felt the pull of the warp beginning. She raised her hand in farewell, and Alan returned the gesture in his own way, inclining his head respectfully. Then reality twisted, and Robin was somewhere else, an alien facility on a world of purple skies and strange vegetation. Empty but intact, with architect technology humming quietly in the background, and, most importantly, with a conventional warp gate that would take her back to human space. Robin wasted no time. She activated the gate, inputted coordinates for the nearest Transgov colony, and stepped through once more. Another twist of reality, and she found herself on a human space station where confused security officers immediately surrounded her, demanding to know who she was and how she'd accessed an unauthorized warp gate. Robin smiled grimly. My name is Robin. I have evidence of murder and illegal bioweapon research conducted by Altera Corporation on Planet 4546b, and I'd like to speak to whoever is in charge of investigating corporate crimes, please. What followed was months of investigations, hearings, and legal proceedings. The evidence Robin provided was overwhelming. Video of Lillian's murder, proof of illegal Kharaa research, communications showing a conspiracy at the highest levels of Altera's regional management. The media coverage was intense, with Planet 4546b becoming a symbol of corporate overreach and the need for better oversight of off-world operations. Parvan Ivanov was arrested and charged with murder. Several Altera executives were charged with criminal conspiracy. The corporation itself faced massive fines and sanctions. And new regulations were put in place governing research activities on quarantined worlds, specifically to prevent the kind of bioweapon development Altera had attempted. But perhaps most significantly, the story of the architects became public knowledge. The data Al-An had shared, the history of their civilization, their mistakes and their extinction, all of it entered the public consciousness. Humanity learned that they were not the first intelligent species to reach the stars, and that achieving great technological advancement did not guarantee survival. As for Robin, she testified at the trials, gave countless interviews, and tried to process her grief over Lillian's death. The justice she achieved didn't bring her sister back, but it ensured that Lillian's work would be remembered and that her death would not be in vain. And sometimes, late at night, Robin would think about Al-An. She wondered where he was, what he was doing, whether he'd found any purpose in his solitary existence as the last of his kind. She hoped he was okay. She hoped their paths would cross again someday. Epilogue. The ocean restored. Back on Planet 4546b, in the tropical crater where Riley Robinson had survived, the ocean teemed with life. The Sea Emperor's children had grown large, swimming through the deep waters, releasing their enzyme in trace amounts that kept any potential infection at bay. The ecosystem had recovered from the 1,000-year plague. species diversifying and evolving, the planet healing itself. The Aurora's wreckage still sat on the horizon, a monument to what had happened here. But coral was growing on it now. Fish nested in its flooded compartments, and eventually it would be just another reef formation, indistinguishable from the natural environment. The Degasi bases stood empty but intact, visited occasionally by researchers who were studying the planet's history. Paul, Bart, and Margaret's story had been pieced together from their logs, and they were remembered as the first humans to encounter this world, survivors who had fought against impossible odds. The architect facilities remained as well, preserved by technology that would outlast human civilization. Researchers studied them carefully, learning what they could, always mindful of the warnings in the data logs. The quarantine enforcement platform had been permanently deactivated, but was kept intact as a historical site, a reminder of the price of carelessness. In Sector 0, Altera's research facilities had been shut down pending review. Some would eventually reopen under strict oversight. Others would be dismantled, but the planet itself would remain open to careful, regulated exploration. Not as a resource to be exploited, but as a place to be studied and respected. And deep in the primary containment facility, in the great tank where the Sea Emperor had lived and died, a memorial had been established. A plaque, placed there by Riley Robinson during a return visit to the planet, read, "In memory of the Sea Emperor, who waited 1,000 years in imprisonment, who mourned countless children, and who gave freely of herself to cure a world. May we learn from her patience, her sacrifice, and her hope that those who came after would prove wiser than those who came before." Below the memorial, through the clear waters of the tank, 5 shapes could occasionally be glimpsed: the Emperor's children, now nearly as large as their mother had been, swimming through the facility that had been their birthplace. They had claimed it as their home, transforming the prison into a sanctuary, and from here they spread their healing through the planet's oceans. The story of Planet 4546b, of the architects and the Kharaa, of survivors and sacrifice, would be told for generations. It would serve as a warning about the dangers of playing with forces beyond one's understanding, as an inspiration about the power of perseverance and courage, and as a reminder that sometimes the solution to our greatest problems isn't more technology or control, but simply the wisdom to let nature take its course. Far away, in a distant corner of space, Alan looked up at alien stars and thought about the ocean world he'd left behind. He thought about his people, about their mistakes and their achievements, and he thought about the humans he'd met, particularly the woman who had given him life again. Perhaps, he thought, his people's extinction didn't have to be the end. Perhaps their legacy could live on in the lessons they'd taught, in the warnings their history provided, in the hope that younger species might learn and grow and succeed where the architects had failed. Al-An set his course toward the galactic core, toward mysteries yet unexplored, toward a future that was uncertain but full of possibility. He was alone, yes, but he was alive, and as long as he lived, the architects would not be completely forgotten. The end.